She was a 58-year-old woman who lost her marriage in a devastating betrayal. The night before her son's wedding, she found her husband of 30 years with the mother of the bride. Her husband and his powerful mistress tried to destroy her with lies and legal threats. The wedding was a sham. The war that followed was devastatingly real. I want to start by giving a special shout out to my wonderful and loyal subscribers who are always with me in the comments. Today's shout out goes to Loretta from Houston, Joyce from Michigan, and also to Charles, Diane, and Kevin. Your support means the world to me. Thank you for being here with me. The night before my son's wedding, I went looking for my husband to show him the antique cufflinks we'd bought as a surprise for our boy. I found him. He was in the hotel's moonlit garden, his back to me, standing close to a woman who was silhouetted against the flowering magnolias. As I got closer, I saw his hands, my husband's hands, tangled in the shimmering silver hair of the mother of the bride. In that one silent, devastating moment, my 30-year marriage didn't just end. It evaporated as if it had never been real at all. But before the moment that shattered my world into a million unrecognizable pieces, there were the days of blissful, ignorant, and joyful preparation. The days when I still believed in the life I had built. My name is Eleanor, and at 58, my universe had one bright, burning center, my son, David. And his wedding was to be the proudest moment of my life. The week leading up to the ceremony was a beautiful, chaotic symphony of last-minute fittings, flower arrangements, and family arrivals. We had all gathered at a historic hotel in the heart of Atlanta, its grand halls filled with the scent of lilies and old Southern charm. My life, up until that point, had been a quiet success story, or so I believed. My marriage to my husband, Richard, was a long one, a comfortable one. He was a successful architect, a man whose charm could captivate any room. We had built a beautiful life, a lovely home, and raised a wonderful son. The fiery, passionate love of our youth had, over 30 years, settled into a gentle, predictable companionship. It was a life of shared histories and comfortable silences. I thought we were happy. I thought we were safe. The joy I felt that week was immense. Seeing my son David so completely in love with his fiancée, a sweet and intelligent young woman named Chloe, was the culmination of all my dreams for him. He was happy, and his happiness was my own. Chloe's mother, Isabella, had flown in from California for the wedding. She was a striking woman, a recent divorcee with a charismatic, almost overwhelming energy. She was all shimmering silver hair, expensive perfume, and dramatic, sweeping gestures. In our first few meetings, I felt a sense of camaraderie with her. We were two mothers from two different worlds, about to be joined by the marriage of our children. We were the matriarchs of a new, emerging family. "Eleanor, darling," she had said, grasping my hands at our first joint planning meeting, her rings cold against my skin, "we must ensure this is the most perfect day of their lives. We are a team now, you and I. I had been charmed by her enthusiasm, by her insistence that we were partners in this endeavor. She was effusive in her praise of Richard, my husband. "My God, Eleanor, he's just as handsome as David described," she'd said, laughing at the welcome dinner. "You are a lucky woman." I had beamed with a quiet pride. Richard, for his part, seemed to be making a special effort. He was more attentive than he had been in years, his arm always around my waist, his smile ever present. He and Isabella struck up an easy, laughing rapport. I was delighted. It was crucial, I thought, for the two families to blend seamlessly. I saw their shared jokes and easy conversation as a wonderful sign, a foundation for a happy future for our children. I was so focused on my son's happiness that I failed to see what was truly happening right in front of my eyes. The unease started as a quiet, nameless whisper in the back of my mind, a single dissonant note in an otherwise perfect symphony. It was the night of the rehearsal dinner, 2 days before the wedding. The dinner was held in a private room at a beautiful old restaurant, the table filled with the happy, laughing faces of our closest family and friends. Richard and Isabella were seated across from each other, and throughout the meal I started to notice things. A shared glance that lasted a second too long, a private, knowing smile that passed between them when someone else was telling a story. Richard laughed at her jokes with a fervor I hadn't seen from him in years. At one point, she reached across the table to playfully touch his hand to emphasize a point, and the gesture, while innocent on the surface, felt charged, intimate. I felt a cold, prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I was stressed, exhausted from the planning, and my imagination was running away with me. This was Isabella, Chloe's mother, our new family. This was Richard, my husband of 30 years. To even allow such a thought to form was a betrayal in itself. I pushed the feeling down, chiding myself for my foolishness. It was just the pre-wedding jitters, after all. Just two people getting along for the sake of their children. I took a sip of my wine, looked at my son's happy, beaming face, and I told myself with a certainty I desperately wanted to believe that I had absolutely nothing in the world to worry about. That night, after the rehearsal dinner, the feeling of wrongness followed me back to our hotel suite. It was a cold, slick residue that I couldn't seem to wash away. Richard came out of the bathroom loosening his tie, a look of cheerful exhaustion on his face. "Well," he said with a sigh, "that went off without a hitch. Your son is a lucky man." Chloe is a wonderful girl, and her mother, well, Isabella is certainly a character, isn't she? I was sitting on the edge of the bed, tracing the pattern of the damask bedspread with my finger. "She seems very fond of you," I said, the words carefully chosen, testing the waters. Richard laughed, a loud, dismissive sound. "Oh, she's just a flirt, Eleanor. One of those women who needs to be the center of attention. Don't be so serious. It's a happy occasion. Let's not overthink it." He leaned down and kissed the top of my head, a familiar, passionless gesture of dismissal. "Now, I'm exhausted. We have a long day tomorrow." His casual deflection worked. It made me feel foolish, provincial, a prudish old woman seeing shadows where there were none. I pushed my intuition down, burying it under a layer of logic and reason. He was right. It was a celebration. I was just tired. The next day, the day before the wedding, was a blur of forced festivity. I spent the morning at a spa with Chloe, Isabella, and the bridesmaids. It was supposed to be a relaxing bonding experience, but with Isabella there, it felt more like a performance. She held court, telling loud, dramatic stories of her life in California, her voice echoing off the marble walls of the steam room. She directed much of her charm and her questions at me. "Richard was telling me the most fascinating story about the bridge he designed downtown," she said, as a technician painted her toenails a startling shade of crimson. "The man is a legitimate genius, Eleanor." "You must be so incredibly proud I am," I said, my voice a quiet echo of her booming enthusiasm. Her praise felt less like a compliment to me and more like a public declaration of her own intimate knowledge of my husband. She was subtly, expertly positioning herself as someone who truly appreciated his brilliance, implying, of course, that I, in my quiet companionship, did not. Richard, meanwhile, was a ghost. He was supposed to be with David and the groomsmen, a final day of male bonding. But his phone, which was usually a tool for his work, had become an extension of his hand. I saw it at lunch when the two family groups briefly merged. He was smiling down at a text, a private, almost giddy smile that was not for me. When he saw me looking, the smile vanished, and he quickly put the phone away. "Just a last-minute crisis at the office," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. It was a clumsy lie, and we both knew it. The fear, which had been a quiet whisper, was now a persistent, nagging voice. I felt a profound sense of loneliness in the middle of all the laughter and celebration. I was the mother of the groom, the matriarch of the hour, but I felt like a stranger at my own party, the only one who could see the cracks appearing in the beautiful, happy facade. I tried to speak to David, to my son, needing to anchor myself to his solid, uncomplicated joy. I found him by the hotel pool, laughing with his bride-to-be. "Mom, isn't this amazing?" he said, pulling me into a hug. "Everyone is getting along so well." I was worried Isabella would be a bit much, but she and Dad have really hit it off. "They certainly have," I said, my voice tight. He didn't notice. He was too happy, too blissfully in love. "You're worrying for nothing," he said, kissing my cheek. "Everything is perfect." That evening, the night before the wedding, our immediate family gathered in my and Richard's suite for a final informal toast. The room was filled with warmth and love. David and Chloe were glowing. My heart ached with the love for them, so fierce it was almost painful. It was in that moment of pure maternal joy that I remembered our gift. "Richard, darling," I said, touching his arm, "the cufflinks. We should give them to David tonight, a quiet moment before all the chaos of tomorrow. I had found them in an antique shop months ago. A beautiful pair of vintage silver cufflinks, intricately engraved. They were the perfect gift for my son, a classic, timeless piece to mark the most important day of his life. Richard had been tasked with picking them up from the hotel concierge after they had been professionally polished. He looked at me, and for a split second I saw a flicker of panic in his eyes. "Oh, right. The cufflinks," he said, clearing his throat. I left them in my coat pocket, in the closet. I'll get them in a bit." He seemed strangely flustered, eager to change the subject. A moment later, he made his excuses. "I need to pop down and discuss the final payment with the wedding planner in the lobby," he announced to the room before making a hasty exit. A few minutes passed. The toast was made. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the moment to give David the gift was now. It was a mother's instinct, a powerful, undeniable urge. I slipped out of the room, intending to find Richard in the lobby. He wasn't there. The wedding planner's desk was empty. The concierge, a polite young man, informed me that the planner had gone home for the night over an hour ago. The cold knot of dread that had been sitting in my stomach all day tightened. Where was he? I walked through the quiet, opulent corridors, my footsteps silenced by the thick carpeting. On an impulse, I pushed open the heavy glass doors that led out to the hotel's formal gardens. The air was warm and thick with the scent of magnolias. The garden was bathed in the soft, romantic glow of the moon. It was a perfect night. And there, in the distance, under a trellis of white roses, I saw the silhouette of my husband. He was not alone. He was standing intimately close to a woman with shimmering silver hair. The dread in my stomach turned to ice. I took a step forward onto the grass, my heart a stone in my chest. I needed to see. I needed to know. I needed my foolish, hopeful heart to be wrong. And that's when the moonlight caught them just right. And I saw his hands. My husband's hands. The hands I had held for 30 years gently, tenderly disappear into Isabella's hair as he pulled her in for a deep, lingering kiss. For a long, silent moment, the world ceased to exist. There was only that single, perfect, horrifying image burned onto the back of my eyelids. My husband and the mother of my son's bride, locked in a passionate embrace under a canopy of white roses. The scent of magnolias, which had felt so sweet and romantic just moments before, now seemed thick and cloying, the perfume of decay. My body moved before my mind did. I took a stumbling step backward, then another, my heel sinking into the soft, manicured grass. I was a ghost, a silent witness to the demolition of my own life. I did not scream. I did not cry. The shock was too profound, a cataclysmic event that was happening on a purely cellular level, too deep for sound. I turned and fled, my movements clumsy and uncoordinated, stumbling back through the heavy glass doors, back into the brightly lit, air-conditioned world of the hotel, a world that was no longer real to me. I made my way back to our suite, my hand trailing along the flocked wallpaper of the corridor to keep my balance. The sound of happy, familiar voices grew louder as I approached the door. My son, my sister, my nephews, all laughing, blissfully unaware that the foundations of our family had just been reduced to rubble. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, and the warmth and laughter of the room felt like a physical assault. My son David looked up and smiled at me, his face alight with a pure, uncomplicated joy. "There you are, Mom." We were just about to send out a search party. I had to summon every ounce of strength I possessed to arrange my face into the semblance of a smile. "Just needed a breath of fresh air," I managed to say, my voice sounding thin and reedy to my own ears. I could feel their eyes on me, and I knew that if I stayed in that room for one more second, the fragile mask I was wearing would shatter. "I'm feeling a little tired, I think." All the excitement. "I'm just going to go lie down for a bit." Before anyone could protest, I retreated to the master bedroom of the suite, closing the heavy door behind me. The silence of the room was a welcome relief. I walked over to the large window and looked down at the garden, the scene of the crime. It was empty now. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the expensive silk of the comforter cool against my trembling hands. And there, in the solitude of that room, the pain hit me. It was a physical force, a crushing weight on my chest that made it impossible to breathe. 30 years of shared meals, of raising a child, of quiet companionship, of building a life. 30 years of believing I was a partner, a wife, when it turned out I was just a placeholder, a comfortable habit he had no intention of honoring. The betrayal was multifaceted, each layer sharper and more painful than the last. There was Richard, my husband, whose disrespect was so profound that he would choose the night before our only son's wedding to commit this atrocity. He hadn't just been unfaithful. He had desecrated the most sacred event of our family life. And then there was Isabella, the woman who had called me her partner, her team, who had wrapped her treachery in a cloak of shared maternal joy. I had been a fool, a trusting, naive fool. My thoughts went to David and Chloe, and a fresh wave of nausea washed over me. Their new life together, their beautiful, perfect beginning, was now built upon a foundation of deceit and rot. Their marriage was a sham before it had even begun, tainted by the sordid actions of the two people who were supposed to be their role models. I didn't know how long I sat there, lost in the ruins of my life, but eventually the bedroom door opened. It was Richard. He walked in, humming a little tune, the picture of a man without a care in the world. He had the cufflinks in his hand. "There you are," he said cheerfully. "I was just talking to the concierge, sorting out the final bill. Look, they did a beautiful job polishing these, didn't they?" He held them out for me to see. I just stared at him, my expression blank. He finally seemed to register the atmosphere in the room, the dead cold silence. His smile faltered. "Eleanor? What is it? Are you feeling ill?" My voice, when it came, was a hollow whisper. "I saw you, Richard," I said, in the garden, with her, the color drained from his face. The charming, confident mask evaporated, revealing the weak, terrified man beneath. He stammered, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape. Eleanor, it's not what you think it was. And what was it, Richard? I asked, my voice still quiet, still dead. What was it I saw? It was a mistake, he said, his voice a pathetic rush of excuses. A moment of weakness. This wedding, all the stress, the emotion, Isabella, she'd been through a lot. We were just talking. It was a mistake. It meant nothing. It meant nothing. He had taken 30 years of my life, of my loyalty, and in one sordid, selfish act, he had declared that it all meant nothing. He saw the look on my face and his desperation grew. He came toward me, his hands outstretched. Please, Eleanor, he begged, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Please don't do this. Not now. Think of David. Think of Chloe. Their perfect day is tomorrow. We can't ruin it for them. We can get through the wedding for them. Just one more day of pretending. We can talk about this after. Please. I looked at the man I had married, the man I had built a life with, the father of my child. He wasn't asking for my forgiveness. He wasn't even begging for my understanding. He was asking me to be his accomplice in the greatest and most cruel lie of our lives. He was asking me to stand beside him at the altar, to smile for the cameras, to protect him from the consequences of his own wretched betrayal. And in that moment, the grief in my heart died and something much harder, much colder, and much more dangerous began to take its place. I did not sleep. I lay in the king-sized bed in that opulent hotel suite, a chasm of cold, empty space between my husband and me, and I stared into the darkness. Richard, his conscience apparently clear enough for slumber, breathed the deep, even breaths of an innocent man beside me. He was a stranger. The man I had shared a bed with for 30 years was a complete and utter stranger, and I was trapped in a room with him on the single most important day of our son's life. The grief I had felt in the garden had burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, hard, and unnervingly clear resolve. The question was no longer if my marriage was over. The question was how I would survive the next 12 hours. Richard's pathetic, self-serving plea that I pretend for David's sake had been a final, clarifying insult. He was right. I would pretend, but not for him. I would give my son this one last perfect day, even if it was a beautiful, hollow lie. I would swallow my pain. I would wear a mask of maternal joy, and I would perform the role of the happy, proud mother of the groom. It would be my final gift to the family we once were. And the moment the last guest left the reception, the moment my duty to my son was fulfilled, my life with Richard would be over. The morning arrived with a flurry of bright, cheerful chaos that felt like a personal assault. Hairstylists and makeup artists descended upon the suite, filling the air with the scent of hairspray and a stream of bubbly, incessant chatter. My sister, my nieces, and the bridesmaids, all giddy with excitement, created a whirlwind of silk robes and champagne flutes. I was an island of cold, silent calm in the middle of their joyful storm. Chloe, the bride, was radiant. She was a vision of youthful hope, her face glowing with a love so pure it was almost painful to witness. She came and sat beside me at the vanity, her happiness a palpable, living thing. "Aren't you excited, Eleanor?" she whispered, squeezing my hand. "In a few hours, we'll officially be family." I looked at her sweet, innocent face and my heart cracked. This beautiful girl who was about to become my daughter-in-law was the child of the woman who had just destroyed my life. The irony was a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. I forced a smile that felt like a grimace. "I'm thrilled, my dear," I said, my voice a stranger's. The real test of my resolve came when Isabella swept into the room. She was a vision in champagne-colored silk, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her face a mask of maternal pride. She was a brilliant actress. She greeted everyone with her usual dramatic flair, and then she turned to me, her eyes glittering with a false camaraderie. "Eleanor, darling," she chirped, kissing the air beside my cheek. "Can you believe the day is finally here? Our babies are all grown up." I met her gaze, and for a split second, I let the mask slip. I let her see the cold, hard knowledge in my eyes. I saw a flicker of something in her own, not guilt, but a flash of wary, calculating assessment. She knew that I knew, and she knew that I had not, as of yet, set off the bomb. My silence had bought her a temporary reprieve, and the game between us had begun. "It is a momentous day," I said, my voice as cool and crisp as the champagne she was holding. I turned away from her then, a small, quiet act of dismissal that I knew she would understand perfectly. My son, David, came to my room an hour before the ceremony. He was breathtakingly handsome in his tuxedo, a perfect blend of his father and me. He was also a nervous wreck. "Mom, is my tie straight? Do I look okay?" "I feel like I'm going to be sick," he said, pacing back and forth. This was the reason I was enduring this excruciating charade, this beautiful, nervous, wonderful young man. I stood up and straightened his tie, my fingers lingering for a moment on the fine silk. I looked into his eyes, my son's eyes, and I poured every ounce of love I had into my smile. "You look perfect," I said, my voice thick with an emotion that was not a lie. "And you have nothing to be nervous about. Chloe loves you, and you love her. That's the only thing that matters in the whole world." I kissed his cheek. "I am so proud of you." He hugged me, a fierce, grateful hug. "Thanks, Mom. I'm glad you're here." The simple words were a knife in my heart. He had no idea how close I had come to not being there at all. After he left, I was alone. It was time to put on my own costume. My dress, a beautiful floor-length gown of deep sapphire blue, had been chosen in another lifetime, a time of happiness and excitement. Now, as I slipped it on, it felt like armor. I looked at myself in the mirror. I saw a poised, elegant 58-year-old woman. Her makeup was perfect. Her hair was perfect. She looked like the proud and happy mother of the groom. She was the most convincing liar I had ever seen. The door to the bedroom opened and Richard walked in. He was already in his tuxedo, looking handsome, distinguished, and completely fraudulent. We stood for a moment in silence, two actors waiting for our cue in the final tragic scene of our marriage. "It's time, Eleanor," he said, his voice a low, pleading whisper. "The guests are seated. Can you do this?" I met his gaze in the mirror. I saw the desperation in his eyes, the pathetic hope that I would help him salvage this day, help him protect himself. "Oh, I can do this, Richard," I said, my voice a silken, dangerous whisper. I turned to face him, a small, cold smile on my lips. "I'm doing this for my son. But I want you to know, as you stand there today and smile for the cameras, that every single moment of my joy is a lie. And this is the very last lie I will ever tell for you." The walk from the hotel suite to the grand ballroom where the ceremony was being held was the longest walk of my life. I moved in a slow, stately procession with the rest of the bridal party, a ghost in a sapphire gown. Richard was already at the front of the room in his place beside our son. He was the perfect picture of the proud father of the groom, handsome and distinguished in his tuxedo, a complete and utter fraud. I took my seat in the front row, my sister giving my hand a reassuring squeeze, misinterpreting my rigid posture as a case of maternal nerves. The room was breathtaking, a fairy tale of white roses and flickering candlelight. Hundreds of faces, friends, and family from every chapter of our lives were turned toward the front, their expressions beaming with shared joy. I felt a profound and dizzying sense of detachment, as if I were floating above my own body, watching a play in which I had been unwillingly cast. The music swelled, and the ceremony began. The minister, a kind-faced man with a gentle voice, spoke of the sanctity of marriage, of trust, of the building of a shared future on a foundation of honesty and unconditional love. Every word was a hot coal against my heart. I sat there, my back ramrod straight, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, and I focused on the 4 people at the altar. I looked at my son, David, his face so full of love and hope as he watched his bride walk toward him that it was almost painful to see. And I looked at Chloe, his beautiful, innocent Chloe, who was marrying into a family that had imploded just hours before. Their love, their joy, was the only real and true thing in this entire elaborate charade. And I clung to it, using it as a shield to get me through the next hour. Then I would allow my gaze to drift to Richard. I saw him not as my husband, but as a stranger I was studying for the first time. I saw the slight tremor in his hand as he adjusted his tie. I saw the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and I saw the way he steadfastly, pointedly refused to look at me. He was a guilty man, and a coward. And then there was Isabella, seated in the front row, directly across the aisle, the matriarch in champagne silk. She was performing just as I was, her face a mask of perfect, teary-eyed maternal pride. But I could feel her gaze on me, a constant probing pressure. It was a silent, tense standoff between the 2 mothers, a secret war being waged in the middle of a celebration of love. She was assessing me, trying to gauge the threat I posed. And I let her look, my expression a calm, unreadable mask. I would not give her the satisfaction of my tears. I would not give her the drama she so clearly craved. I would give her nothing but ice. As David and Chloe exchanged their vows, their voices clear and full of a breathtaking sincerity, my mind drifted back to my own wedding day, 30 years ago. I remembered the hope I had felt, the naive belief that our arranged marriage could, with time and effort, blossom into a real and loving partnership. Had any of it been real? Or had my entire adult life been a slow, 30-year-long lie? I thought of the small, quiet moments of companionship I had mistaken for love, the comfortable habits I had mistaken for intimacy. It had all been an illusion, and the magician had just been revealed as a cheap, back-alley trickster. The minister's voice brought me back to the present. "You may now kiss your bride." As my son kissed his new wife, a wave of joyous applause erupted through the ballroom. Everyone was on their feet, their faces alight with happiness. In that moment of collective celebration, I felt a profound and final sense of an ending. This was the last time this group of people would ever be gathered together in this way, believing in the happy, solid family that was the Smiths. The future I had always imagined, a future of grandchildren, of holidays, of growing old with the man I had married, vanished like smoke, and in its place, a new, unwritten, and terrifying future began to take shape. A future I would have to build by myself from the ground up. The recessional music began, a triumphant, soaring melody. The happy couple, David and Chloe, practically floated back down the aisle, their faces a picture of pure bliss. They were followed by the bridesmaids and groomsmen, and then it was our turn, the parents. Richard walked over to my row. His face was a perfect mask of public joy. his eyes shining as he looked at our cheering friends and family. He held out his arm for me, the gesture he had performed 1,000 times. We are a team. We are a unit. We are the Smiths. I looked at his outstretched arm, at the hand that had held mine for 3 decades, the hand that had been tangled in another woman's hair just the night before. The thought of touching him, of linking my arm with his and smiling for this crowd was physically repulsive. A wave of nausea washed over me. For a split second I thought, I can't do this. But the performance was not over. Not yet. I took a deep, steadying breath, rose to my feet, and placed my hand in the crook of his arm. His skin was cool to the touch. Or perhaps it was just the ice in my own veins. I took his arm, my smile as wide and as fake as his. The crowd saw the proud, happy parents of the groom, a picture of enduring love. All I saw was the man whose life, whose reputation, and whose comfortable, easy world I was going to systematically and completely dismantle, starting the very moment the last glass of champagne was poured. We walked the length of the aisle, a perfect, smiling couple, our arms linked in a public display of a unity that had been murdered just the night before. The applause of our friends and family washed over us, a warm, genuine wave of love that I felt utterly disconnected from. It was not for us. It was for the illusion of us, the happy 30-year marriage that had just been revealed to me as a hollow sham. The reception was a masterpiece of opulence and denial. The grand ballroom was bathed in the warm glow of 1,000 candles, the tables laden with roses and champagne. A live jazz band played softly in the corner, their smooth, soulful melodies a stark contrast to the sharp, jagged edges of my new reality. Richard and I moved through the room, playing our parts. He was the charming, jovial host, accepting backslaps and congratulations. I was the serene, proud mother, smiling until my facial muscles ached, my heart a block of ice in my chest. My sister, Martha, pulled me aside near the towering 7-tiered wedding cake. She looked at me, her brow furrowed with a genuine concern that was almost my undoing. "Eleanor, are you all right?" she whispered, her hand on my arm. "You seem fragile." "It's okay to be emotional, you know. Your baby boy just got married." I summoned a tear to my eye, a feat of acting that I'm sure would have won me an award. "Oh, I know," I said, my voice thick with a carefully crafted tremor. "It's just all so overwhelming. I'm just so happy for him." She hugged me, and for a moment I almost broke. I almost confessed everything, the whole sordid, heartbreaking truth, but I couldn't. This was David's day, his one perfect day, and I would not be the one to burn it to the ground. That was a fire reserved for Richard, and I would be the one to light the match. Later, as I was speaking to an old college friend, I felt a presence beside me. It was Isabella. She was flushed with champagne and victory, her relief at having dodged a bullet making her bold. "Isn't it all just perfect?" she said, linking her arm through mine as if we were the oldest and dearest of friends. "We did it, Eleanor. A perfect day for our perfect children." I turned to her slowly, a small, polite smile fixed on my face. I leaned in close, my voice a low, pleasant whisper that was for her ears only. "It is a perfect night, Isabella," I said, my smile never wavering. "You should enjoy every single second of it. I have a feeling it may be the last perfect night you have for a very long time." I saw the color drain from her face. The triumphant sparkle in her eyes was extinguished, replaced by a cold, hard fear. I had just confirmed her worst nightmare. I knew, and I was not going to be silent. I simply smiled again, patted her hand and walked away, leaving her standing alone by the champagne fountain, her perfect night suddenly and irrevocably ruined. The speeches were an exercise in exquisite torture. Richard stood, raised his glass, and delivered a moving, eloquent toast to David and Chloe. He spoke of the importance of family, of loyalty, of a love that can withstand the tests of time. He looked at me as he said it, a silent, pathetic plea for complicity in his eyes. I smiled back, a serene and gracious wife, and silently raised my own glass to his breathtaking hypocrisy. Then came the mother-son dance. David took my hand and led me to the dance floor. For the 3 minutes that the band played, the rest of the world, with its lies and betrayals, fell away. There was only my son. I held him close, my cheek against his, breathing in the familiar scent of the little boy I had raised, the good man he had become. "You okay, Mom?" he whispered as he swayed with me to the music. "You've been so quiet all day." "I've never been prouder, my love," I whispered back, my voice thick with the only true emotion I had felt all day. Never. It was a goodbye. A farewell to his innocence, to the simple, unbroken family he thought he had. When the party began to wind down and the newlyweds were finally sent off, in a shower of rice and good wishes, Richard found me near the now empty ballroom doors. The performance was over. He looked exhausted, but also profoundly relieved. He believed he had done it. We had pulled it off. "Thank you, Eleanor," he whispered, his voice hoarse with a gratitude I found repulsive. "You were incredible. I know things are complicated, but we can fix this. I know we can. We can get through this." I looked at him, the man I had given my life to, the man who had shattered my world and then had the audacity to thank me for helping him hide the pieces. The cold, hard thing that had taken the place of my heart finally spoke. I slowly, deliberately pulled the platinum and diamond wedding ring from my finger. It felt strangely light. I held it out on the palm of my hand. He stared at it, his face a mask of confusion. "There is no we to fix, Richard," I said, my voice as calm and as clear as a winter morning. I placed the ring on the small table beside us, the diamonds glinting like chips of ice under the dim lights. "I suggest you call your lawyer first thing in the morning," I said, "because my lawyer will be calling him." "I am leaving, Richard. Not just this party, not just this hotel. I am leaving you. And I will not be going quietly." I turned then and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the beautiful empty ballroom with the wreckage of our 30-year marriage glittering on the table between us. I woke up the morning after my son's wedding in a room I had never seen before. After leaving Richard standing amidst the ruins of the reception, I had gone directly to the front desk of the hotel. With a calm, clear voice that felt like it belonged to someone else, I had requested a separate suite on a different floor, paid for it with my own personal credit card, and had a bellman escort me to my new, temporary life. I did not sleep. I sat in an armchair by the window, watching the sun rise over a city that felt utterly changed. The world had not ended, but my world had. And in the quiet, gray light of dawn, I felt not just the profound ache of loss, but the terrifying, exhilarating thrill of a blank page. My first act as a free woman was to pick up the phone. It was not yet 7 a.m. when I called my lawyer. I had met with her 6 months prior on a whim for a discreet what-if consultation. Her name was Caroline, a sharp, empathetic woman who had seen this story play out 100 times. "Caroline," I said when she answered, her voice thick with sleep, "it's Eleanor Smith." "It's happening," I told her everything. The garden, the confrontation, Richard's plea, the wedding, the ring on the table. I recounted it all in a flat, emotionless tone. When I was finished, there was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. "Good for you, Eleanor," she finally said, her voice now sharp and fully awake. "Oh, okay. Here's what happens now. Do not go back to the house. Do not speak to Richard. Do not speak to Isabella. From this moment on, everything goes through me. We file first thing tomorrow morning. The battle has begun, and you have just seized the high ground. Her calm, strategic confidence was a lifeline. For the first time, I was not alone in this. I had an ally. My next call was the one I dreaded most. I waited until after 9 a.m., giving the newlyweds a few hours of peace on their first morning as husband and wife before I dialed my son's number. He was on his way to the airport for his honeymoon in Italy, and his voice was full of sleepy, happy bliss. "Mom! We were just talking about you. Last night was amazing. The best night of my life." The words were a dagger in my heart. "I'm so glad, my love," I said, my voice thick with an emotion he would misinterpret as joy. "Listen, honey, I'm so sorry to do this to you right now. There is no good time to say this, so I just have to say it." I took a deep, shaky breath. "Your father and I, we are separating. I've left him. It's over." The silence on the other end of the line was a physical blow. I could hear his happiness shattering. "What?" he finally stammered. "What are you talking about?" "That's not possible. Everything was perfect yesterday. Mom, what happened? Whatever it is, you can fix it. Just go home and talk to him." "No, sweetheart," I said, the words tasting like ash. "Some things can't be fixed. This is final. This is between your father and me. I needed you to hear it from me. Now, please, go on your honeymoon. Be happy. That is all I want for you. We will talk when you get back." I hung up before he could argue, before I could break down. I had just ruined my son's honeymoon. I had just tainted the most beautiful memory of his life. The cost of my freedom, I was beginning to learn, was devastatingly high. Richard's counterattack came an hour later. My phone buzzed with an alert from my bank. Transaction declined. I tried again. Card suspended. I opened my banking app and saw it. The joint accounts, the ones that held the vast majority of our liquid assets, had been frozen. My access was blocked. My name was still on the accounts, but he had clearly called the bank and claimed some kind of fraudulent activity, a move designed to lock me out. It was his first move in the war, and it was a classic one. He was trying to strand me, to cut off my resources, to leave me helpless and penniless in a hotel suite, forcing me to come crawling back to him, defeated. The old Eleanor, the woman who had existed just 24 hours ago, would have panicked. She would have been terrified. But the new Eleanor, the one who had been forged in the fire of his betrayal, was not, because I had an ally, and Caroline had seen this move coming. On her advice 6 months ago, I had opened a new, separate bank account in my own name at a different bank. I had quietly, over several months, funneled a portion of my own personal inheritance from my parents into it. It was not a vast fortune, but it was enough. It was a war chest. Richard thought he was cutting off my life support. He had no idea I had already deployed my own lifeboat. The failed attack, his predictable, brutish attempt to control me with money, did not frighten me. It filled me with a cold, clear, and absolute resolve. He had underestimated me for the last time. I sat down at the small desk by the window. I could mourn later. I could grieve for my son's stolen joy later. Right now, it was time to plan the rest of my life. I opened my laptop. I didn't search for therapists or support groups. I started looking at real estate listings. Not small, sad divorcee apartments. I looked at beautiful, light-filled condos downtown, at charming, historic houses with gardens, at all the places I had secretly dreamed of living, places that were nothing like the cold, opulent mansion I had just left. Richard thought that by freezing my credit cards, he could make me homeless. He had forgotten that for 30 years, while he was busy being a charming architect, I was the one who had managed the household budgets, the investments, the real estate transactions. He thought he was freezing a bank account. He had no idea he was liberating an architect of a different kind, the architect of my own new life. The first shots of the legal war were fired the following Monday. Caroline, my lawyer, filed our petition for divorce. It was a simple, elegant, and brutal document, citing irreconcilable differences and requesting an equitable division of our 30 years of shared assets. As Caroline had advised, we did not mention the adultery. That was a card to be held, a weapon to be used only when necessary. We would begin this fight on the high ground of quiet dignity. Richard's legal team responded with a barrage of motions. They were aggressive, attempting to paint me as an emotionally volatile and unreasonable woman who had impulsively abandoned a loving, long-term marriage over a simple misunderstanding. They tried to argue that the bulk of the fortune was his, a product of his architectural genius, and that I was merely a homemaker entitled to a small token alimony. It was a classic ugly strategy, designed to intimidate and exhaust me into submission. They did not know who they were dealing with anymore. The true battlefield, however, was not the courtroom. It was my own heart. David and Chloe cut their honeymoon short, the news of our separation having shattered their blissful bubble. David called me the day they got back, his voice thick with the pain that tore me in two. He asked to see me. We met in the quiet, neutral space of my hotel suite. My son, my beautiful boy, looked exhausted, his face etched with a worry that should not have belonged to a new husband just back from his honeymoon. "Mom, I don't understand," he pleaded, his hands twisting in his lap. "I spoke to Dad. He's a wreck. He's staying at a hotel. He told me he made a terrible, stupid mistake, but he loves you. He said he would do anything to fix it. Can't you just talk to him? Please? For me? For all of us?" It was the first major test of my new resolve, and it was the hardest. To see my son in so much pain, to know that I was the cause of it, was an agony beyond words. The old Eleanor would have caved instantly, would have sacrificed her own happiness on the altar of her son's comfort, but the old Eleanor was gone. I took his hands in mine, my grip firm and steady. "David, my love," I said, my voice gentle but unyielding, "I know you want to fix this. It's in your nature. You are a good and loving man, but this is not something that can be fixed. The trust between your father and me is broken completely and irrevocably. This isn't about one mistake. This is about a truth that has been revealed. The man I thought I was married to, he doesn't exist. And I cannot, I will not go back to living a lie." The conversation was long and painful. I did not tell him the sordid details about Isabella. That was a poison I would not inflict upon his new marriage, but I was resolute. By the time he left, he was still heartbroken and confused, but a small grudging flicker of understanding had begun to dawn in his eyes. He was not my ally yet, but he was beginning to see that this was not a simple fight that he could mediate. Isabella predictably made her own move. A few days later, I received a long, rambling email from her. It was a masterpiece of manipulative performance art. She wrote of her deep and profound regret of a moment of madness, born of her own loneliness and too much celebratory champagne. She begged for my forgiveness, pleading with me not to let her terrible, unforgivable mistake destroy the mere beautiful family of which she was now a part. "Richard adores you, Eleanor," she wrote. "Please don't throw away 30 years of love because of my weakness." I read the email, and I felt nothing but a cold, clinical disgust. It was a work of pure, self-serving fiction. I didn't reply. I simply forwarded the entire message to Caroline with a single 3-word instruction: for the file. I knew then that I could not stay in the limbo of a hotel. I needed my own ground, my own fortress from which to fight this war. I spent every spare moment on my laptop not just looking at real estate, but hunting. I was hunting for my future, and then I found it. A beautiful, historic townhouse in a quiet, green neighborhood on the other side of the city. It had high ceilings, a small walled garden in the back, and large windows that let in the morning light. It was a place of peace, of substance, of grace. It was everything my cold modern mansion was not. It was a home. Using the funds I had secured in my private account, I put in an offer. It was a bold, decisive act of independence, a statement that I was not waiting for Richard's permission or the court's decision to begin my new life. The news of it, of course, reached him almost immediately. He called my cell phone for the first time since the wedding, his voice a low, furious snarl. The pleading, remorseful husband was gone, replaced by the enraged, controlling man I knew so well. "You bought a house?" he roared, his voice tight with disbelief and fury. "You bought a house? With what money? You think you can just take our money and walk away to start a new life? I will fight you for every single penny, Eleanor. I will leave you with nothing. You have no idea who you are dealing with." A quiet, calm power settled over me. The fear was gone. "No, Richard," I said, my voice as cool and as clear as glass before he could continue his tirade. "For the first time in 30 years, it is you who has no idea who you are dealing with. Please direct any future communications to my lawyer." And then, for the first time in our marriage, I hung up on him. Richard's angry, impotent threats echoed in my mind long after I had hung up the phone, but they had lost their power to frighten me. They were the desperate roars of a king who had just discovered his throne was empty, and his castle walls were made of sand. He had ruled my life for 30 years through a campaign of quiet intimidation and implied authority. Now that I had refused to be intimidated, all he had left was noise. The closing on my new townhouse was a quiet, profoundly significant affair. I sat in a lawyer's office and signed my name, Eleanor Spencer, my maiden name on the deed. It was the first major decision I had made in my entire adult life that was wholly and completely my own. The house was not a strategic asset for a family dynasty or a showpiece for a corporate lifestyle. It was mine. I spent the first week moving in, not with a team of professional movers, but with the help of my sister Martha. We unpacked the boxes I had saved from my old life, the small, precious artifacts of my true self. We unwrapped my father's old jazz records, arranged my beloved history books on the shelves, and drank wine out of mismatched mugs on the floor of the empty living room. "I never liked him, you know," Martha said, breaking a comfortable silence as we looked at the evening light streaming through the large bay window. "Richard, even back in the beginning, he was always performing. I never thought you saw it." "I didn't want to see it," I confessed, the words tasting of a sad, quiet truth. "I wanted to believe in the life everyone had planned for me." "Well, look at you now," she said, her smile full of a fierce, loving pride, "planning a new life all on your own. I'm so proud of you, Ellie." Her simple, unconditional support was a balm to my bruised soul. For the first time, I felt like I was not just surviving, but actively building. The first major battle of the legal war was the deposition. It was a day I'd been dreading. I knew Richard's legal team, a pack of high-priced sharks from a downtown firm, would try to tear me apart. Their strategy was to paint me as a naive, clueless, and emotionally unstable homemaker who had no understanding of the vast fortune she was laying claim to. We met in a cold, soulless conference room. I sat on one side of the long, polished table with my lawyer, Caroline. On the other side were Richard and his two lawyers. He refused to look at me, his handsome face set in a mask of bitter resentment. His lead lawyer, a man with cold reptilian eyes, began the questioning. For hours he grilled me, his questions invasive and condescending. He asked about my social life, my emotional state, my spending habits. He was trying to provoke me, to make me break down in tears and prove his narrative that I was an irrational, hysterical woman. But I did not break. Coached by Caroline, I remained calm, my answers direct, quiet, and unshakable. The new Eleanor, the woman who had walked out of her own life on Christmas Eve, was not a woman who could be easily rattled. The turning point came when they began to question my financial knowledge. Mrs. Smith, the lawyer said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, isn't it true that your husband, a renowned architect and businessman, handled all the major financial decisions in your marriage? That you were, shall we say, uninvolved in the complexities of your family's investment portfolio? This was the moment they had been waiting for. The moment they would prove I was just a kept woman, undeserving of the fortune I was asking for. I gave them a small, calm smile. That's not entirely accurate, I said. I reached down and opened the worn leather briefcase at my feet. I pulled out a stack of neat bound ledgers and placed them on the table with a solid, satisfying thud. I have here, I said, my voice clear and steady in the silent room, the complete household and investment ledgers I have personally maintained for the last 25 years. They detail every major property acquisition, every stock transaction, and every tax strategy we employed. I opened the top ledger. I also have the quarterly performance reviews I drafted for our portfolio. Perhaps you'd like to start with the capital gains from the sale of the Charleston property in '08, or we could jump straight to the consolidated income statements from 2012 through 2020. It's your choice. The silence in the room was absolute. Richard's lawyers stared at the ledgers, then at me, their jaws practically on the floor. Richard himself finally looked at me, a look of pure, stunned disbelief on his face. He was seeing me, truly seeing me, for the first time in our entire marriage. He had never known. He had never bothered to ask. After the deposition, as Caroline and I walked out into the bright afternoon sun, she was beaming. You didn't just win the battle, Eleanor, she said. You may have just won the war. They have no idea who they are dealing with. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt seen, validated. That evening, back in my new peaceful home, I was in the small walled garden turning the soil for a new rose bush when the doorbell rang. It was my son, David. He stood on my doorstep looking lost and sad. He had not seen the new house yet. Dad's not doing well, Mom, he said, his voice quiet. Oh, he's angry. All the time. He really thought you would just give up. He doesn't understand what's happening. I'm sorry you're in the middle of this, my love, I said, my heart aching for him. I know, he said, shaking his head. I know this is all a mess. And I know I haven't been fair to you. I've been trying to stay out of it. He paused, his expression shifting to one of deep, troubled concern. But Chloe and I, we've been talking. His expression shifting to one of deep, troubled concern. But Chloe and I, we've been talking. And she told me something. Something that happened with her mom, Isabella, a few years ago. Something about her last divorce. I think it's something you need to know. He looked at me, his eyes full of a dawning, horrified understanding. The betrayal I had witnessed in the garden wasn't the beginning of their story. It was just the chapter I had happened to walk in on. I led David into the sitting room of my new home. the late afternoon sun casting long, gentle stripes across the polished hardwood floors. The air was filled with the scent of lemon oil and the quiet, steady ticking of my grandmother's old mantel clock. It was a house of peace, a sanctuary I was building for myself, and the troubled, anxious energy my son brought in with him felt like a violation of the fragile calm. We sat in silence for a moment as I poured him a cup of tea, the familiar domestic ritual a strange counterpoint to the gravity of his expression. He looked at me, his eyes full of a new and painful awareness. The naive, blissful young man who had gone on his honeymoon was gone, replaced by a man who had been forced to look into the abyss of his new family's secrets. "Chloe is a good person, Mom," he began, his voice low, as if he were making a confession. "She loves me. But she's been carrying this poison around for years. She's terrified of her mother and she's ashamed." He took a deep breath. "The story Dad told everyone, the story Isabella tells, is that her last marriage ended because her ex-husband was a cold, neglectful workaholic. That's not the truth." He recounted the story Chloe had tearfully confessed to him on their honeymoon. Her mother's ex-husband had been a wealthy, older tech entrepreneur. A few years ago, he had been on the verge of a massive company-defining merger. At that exact critical moment, he had discovered that Isabella was having an affair with the young, ambitious architect who was designing their new Malibu mansion. The discovery, made public at the worst possible time, created a scandal that threatened to derail the entire merger. To make it all go away, to avoid the public spectacle and the wrath of his shareholders, the husband had agreed to a divorce settlement that was astronomically generous, far beyond what she would have ever been legally entitled to. He had paid a king's ransom for her silence and a quick, quiet exit. "And the architect?" I asked, my blood running cold. "He disappeared right after the divorce was final," David said, shaking his head. "Chloe said he suddenly got funding to start his own firm in Dubai. He just vanished from their lives." I sat back in my chair, the delicate porcelain of my teacup trembling in my hand. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening clarity. This wasn't a history of heartbreak. It was a business model, a predatory, repeatable pattern. Isabella didn't just have affairs. She weaponized them. She identified a target, a wealthy, powerful man. She found a moment of critical vulnerability in his professional life. And then she created a public, humiliating scandal with a carefully chosen accomplice. A scandal so damaging that her target would pay any price to make it disappear. And my husband, Richard, with his obsession with his public reputation and the timing of our son's high-profile wedding, had been the perfect, willing, and utterly foolish accomplice for her latest acquisition. He wasn't the powerful, charming seducer. He was the pawn. A vain, weak, and easily manipulated pawn in a game so cold and so calculated it took my breath away. She hadn't been seduced by him. She had targeted him. The anger I felt was so pure, so intensely focused that it was almost a calming force. The messy emotional pain of my husband's betrayal was suddenly replaced by the cold, clear logic of a business problem. I was not a woman who had been cheated on. I was a woman who had been conned. After David left, his story, having given me the greatest and most terrible gift of all, the truth, I picked up the phone and called Caroline, my lawyer. I recounted the story of Isabella's last divorce, my voice a calm, steady monotone. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard Caroline let out a low whistle. "Oh, Eleanor," she said, and I could hear a new predatory smile in her voice. "Oh, you magnificent woman. This changes everything. This isn't a simple divorce case anymore. This is a pattern of predatory, deliberate action." It verges on conspiracy to commit fraud. It's almost impossible to prove in a court of law, but the threat of it, the mere suggestion of it in a deposition, my God. I could hear the gears turning in her brilliant legal mind. We were no longer on the defensive, fighting for my share of the assets. We were on the attack. I'm going to have my private investigator start a deep dive into Isabella de la Cruz, or whatever her name was before her last marriage, Caroline said, her voice sharp with a new energy. We need to find that architect in Dubai. In the meantime, we proceed with Richard's deposition next week as planned, but we're going to be asking some very different questions now. We're no longer interested in his assets. We are going to ask him under oath to detail the entire timeline of his relationship with Isabella, starting from the very first day they met. A cold, clear sense of purpose settled over me. I had been grieving a broken marriage. Now, I was preparing for a war against a predator. My goal was no longer to get a fair settlement from my weak, foolish husband. It was to make sure that Isabella, the true and brilliant architect of my family's ruin, would never be in a position to destroy another family again. The day of Richard's deposition was a cold, gray Atlanta morning. I sat beside Caroline in the same sterile conference room where I had been questioned, but the atmosphere was entirely different. The last time, I had been the one on trial, the woman who had to prove her worth. Today, I was the silent, watchful queen on a chessboard, and the opposing king was about to be put in check. Richard entered the room with the easy, confident swagger of a man who believes he is in control. He was flanked by his lawyers, his handsome face arranged into a mask of wronged yet reasonable masculinity. He had been prepped, coached. He believed this was a formality, a day where he would calmly and rationally explain away his moment of weakness and paint me as an unforgiving hysteric. He gave me a brief, condescending nod, a gesture that was meant to put me in my place. I simply stared back, my expression a blank, unreadable slate. Caroline began the questioning gently, lulling him into a false sense of security. She had him recount the timeline of the wedding preparations, his initial meetings with Isabella, his admiration for her vibrant personality. He was charming, articulate, and completely false. He spoke of their blossoming friendship, a natural connection between two families about to be joined. So, to be clear, Mr. Smith, Caroline said, her voice smooth as silk, your personal one-on-one interactions with Ms. De la Cruz began in May, during the official wedding planning. That's correct, Richard said with a confident smile, and it was all for the kids. Caroline nodded, making a small note. Then she opened a thick binder on the table in front of her. That's very interesting, she said, her voice taking on a new, sharper edge, because we have subpoenaed your phone records. They show that you first began texting Miss De la Cruz on the evening of March 28th, a full 3 weeks before your son and her daughter were officially engaged. Can you explain that discrepancy? The confident smile on Richard's face faltered. A flicker of panic appeared in his eyes. I don't recall, he stammered. It must have been a professional inquiry. About a property she owned, perhaps. A professional inquiry that involved 37 text messages over the next 2 days, including several after midnight? Caroline pressed, her voice relentless. Richard's lawyers began to object, but the damage was done, and Caroline was just getting started. For the next 2 hours, she systematically, and with the precision of a surgeon, dismantled his entire narrative. She produced credit card statements showing a secret lunch for 2 at an intimate French restaurant in April. She produced hotel records from a business conference he had attended in Chicago, showing that Isabella had been a guest at the very same hotel, her room just down the hall from his. With each new piece of evidence, Richard's composure crumbled. The charming, confident man was replaced by a red-faced, sputtering mess of lies and evasions. He was no longer a powerful architect. He was just a common, cheating husband caught in a web of his own deceit. When he was thoroughly broken, when his lies were a pile of rubble at his feet, Caroline delivered the final devastating blow. "Mr. Smith," she said, her tone suddenly shifting. "Let's talk about Isabella's previous divorce from her ex-husband, the CEO of Tech Global." His lawyers practically leaped from their chairs. "Objection! Irrelevant. This has no bearing on the current proceedings." "On the contrary, counselor," Caroline said, her voice like ice. "It speaks to a clear and demonstrable pattern of behavior that we believe constitutes fraudulent inducement and has a direct bearing on the dissolution of my client's marital assets." She then, without looking at a single note, laid out the entire story of Isabella's last divorce. The wealthy husband, the critical business merger, the sudden public affair with a professional whose career could be ruined by scandal, the massive out-of-court settlement to make it all go away quietly. The color drained from Richard's face. He looked from Caroline to me, a look of dawning, horrified comprehension in his eyes. He was finally seeing it. He was seeing that he had not been the handsome, charming leading man in a passionate affair. He had been the fool, the mark. A carefully selected tool in a predatory woman's well-rehearsed con. His vanity, his ego, the very things that had made him feel so powerful, had been the strings she had used to make him dance. The deposition was over. Richard sat there, a completely destroyed man, his lies exposed, his pride in tatters. As Caroline and I rode the elevator down, she was triumphant. "He's broken," she said with a grim smile. "They have nothing left." "They'll settle for whatever we want now, Eleanor." "It's over." I didn't feel a shred of triumph. I just felt a quiet, profound pity for the weak, foolish man I had just witnessed being dismantled. I had won. But as my phone buzzed in my purse, I realized the war might not be over. It was a text from an unknown number. There were only a few words. "You think you're so clever, Eleanor? You have no idea the hornet's nest you just kicked. This is not over." It wasn't signed, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it was from her. The war with my husband was over, but my war with Isabella had just begun. The feeling of victory after Richard's deposition was a fragile, fleeting thing. It lasted for the length of the elevator ride down to the lobby and the short, triumphant walk to Caroline's car. But the moment my phone buzzed with that anonymous, venomous text, the victory turned to ash in my mouth. A cold dread settled over me. I had successfully cornered a weak, foolish man. But in doing so, I had enraged a much more dangerous animal, a ruthless, intelligent, and now utterly desperate woman. I showed the text to Caroline. She read it, her triumphant expression hardening into one of grim professional concern. "Richard was a problem to be managed," she said, her voice low and serious. "Isabella is a threat to be neutralized. He fights with lawyers and money. She will fight with poison and shadows. We need to be very, very careful, Eleanor." Her words proved prophetic. Isabella's counterattack was not a legal filing, it was a campaign of social terrorism, and it began almost immediately. She was a master of the whispered lie, the concerned phone call, the carefully crafted rumor. Within a week, the narrative began to shift in the wealthy, insular circles we had once both belonged to. Suddenly, I was no longer the wronged wife. I was a vindictive, mentally unstable woman consumed by a bitter jealousy who had concocted a wild conspiracy theory to ruin the lives of her ex-husband and his new friend. Isabella, of course, was the true victim, a poor, grieving mother who had offered a man a moment of comfort and was now being punished for her compassion. The story was absurd, a complete inversion of the truth, but Isabella told it with such convincing, teary-eyed sincerity that people began to believe it. Old friends from the country club would suddenly cross the street to avoid me. Lunch invitations that had been extended were quietly rescinded. I was being socially excommunicated, isolated by a web of lies so thick I didn't know how to begin to untangle it. But her most cruel and effective weapon was her own daughter. She began to systematically poison Chloe against me, using her as an unwilling pawn in her war. She would call Chloe in the middle of the night, sobbing, claiming I was harassing her, that my lawyer was threatening to destroy her reputation, to leave her penniless. She painted herself as a terrified victim, and Chloe, a good and loving daughter, was caught in the impossible position of defending a monster. The strain on my son's new marriage was immediate and intense. David came to my new house a week later, his face etched with the stress that aged him years. "Mom, what is going on?" he pleaded, his voice ragged with exhaustion. "Chloe is a wreck. She's crying all the time. Her mother is calling her constantly, telling her these horrible stories about how you're trying to ruin her. Can't you just stop? Can't you just focus on the divorce with Dad and leave Isabella out of it? You're tearing our new family apart." The words were a physical blow. He was defending her. My own son, manipulated by his new wife's grief, was now standing in my living room, asking me to stand down, to surrender to the woman who had orchestrated our family's destruction. The isolation was now complete. The old Eleanor would have given in. She would have sacrificed her own justice to preserve her son's fragile peace. But as I looked at my son's anguished face, I felt a surge of cold, hard anger. I would not allow Isabella to use my own child as a weapon against me. "David," I said, my voice firm but not unkind, "the woman your wife calls mother is a predator. She came into our lives with the deliberate intention of destroying our family for her own financial gain. The pain you and Chloe are feeling right now is not my fault. It is hers. And I will not allow her to use you as a shield to protect herself from the consequences of her actions. I am not the one creating this drama. I am the one who is going to end it. Permanently." After he left, I picked up the phone and called Caroline. "Find the architect," I said, my voice a low, steady command. "Find him now." It took her private investigator another week, but he found him. A man named Julian Croft, now a successful and well-respected architect living in Dubai with a new wife and 2 young children. He was, as we expected, terrified. The last thing he wanted was to be dragged into the sordid history of his affair with Isabella. Caroline arranged a secure video conference. We sat in her office, looking at the face of the man on the screen. He was handsome, but his eyes were haunted by a deep, abiding fear. He was polite, but adamant. He would not get involved. He had a new life, a new family to protect. Caroline tried to reason with him, to appeal to his sense of legal obligation, but he was immovable. And then I spoke. "Mr. Croft," I said, my voice quiet, "I am not a lawyer. I am a mother. The woman you had an affair with did the exact same thing to my husband on the eve of my son's wedding to her daughter. She used you, just as she used him. She built her current fortune on the ruins of your reputation and my marriage." He looked away from the screen, his jaw tight. "I am not asking you to testify in court," I continued. "I am not asking you to upend your life. I am asking for a single sworn affidavit detailing the timeline of your relationship and the exact circumstances of Isabella's divorce settlement. A notarized statement of the simple, undeniable truth." He was silent, torn between his fear and his conscience. "She will keep doing this, Miss Croft," I said, my voice low and urgent. "She will keep destroying families, ruining lives, using people like you and me as pawns in her sick, greedy game. She will never stop, unless someone is brave enough to make her. You and I, we are the only two people on earth who know her pattern, who can prove what she is. The only question is, will you help me stop her? The face of the architect on the screen was a portrait of a man at war with himself. Julian Croft, a successful man with a beautiful family and a world-class career in Dubai, was being dragged back into the ugliest chapter of his life by a stranger, a ghost from his past. He was silent for a long, agonizing minute, the pixels of the video call freezing and blurring his tortured expression. I had laid the truth at his feet. I had asked for his help. And now, my entire war, my entire hope for a clean and final justice, rested on the conscience of this one man. Caroline and I waited, the silence in our office thick and heavy. I did not hold my breath. My part was done. I had presented my case. I had spoken my truth. The rest was up to him. Finally, he looked directly into the camera, his eyes meeting mine across the thousands of miles that separated us. I saw the fear there, but I also saw something else. A flicker of a long-buried integrity, a spark of the decent man he had been before Isabella had tried to extinguish it. She ruined a good man, he said, his voice a low, rough whisper. Her ex-husband, he was a good man, and she made me a party to his destruction. He took a deep, shuddering breath. I will do it, he said, his voice firmer now, a decision made. I will not testify. I will not put my family through a public circus, but I will write the affidavit. I will tell the whole ugly truth, and I will have it sworn and notarized. What you do with it after that is up to you, but you are right, Mrs. Smith. Someone has to stop her. A wave of profound relief washed over me, so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. It was the first true crack of light in a long, dark tunnel. We had our weapon. A week later, a secure international courier delivered a thick envelope to Carolyn's office. Inside was the affidavit. It was a 20-page, single-spaced, and utterly damning account of his time with Isabella. It detailed, with the cold, meticulous precision of an architect, the entire affair. It included dates of their secret meetings, summaries of conversations where she had laid out her strategy, and even copies of bank transfers showing the six-figure payment she had made to him from her divorce settlement for his architectural consulting services. It was not just the testimony of a jilted lover, it was the confession of a co-conspirator. It was the smoking gun. With this document in our possession, the entire dynamic of the war shifted. A messy public trial was no longer necessary. A public trial, with its revelations about her son's father and his new mother-in-law, would be a painful, ugly thing for David and Chloe. Isabella knew that, and she was counting on my love for my son to be the chain that kept me from using my best weapon. She was about to learn that my love for my son was also the very thing that fueled my desire to protect him from her, permanently. We would not use the affidavit to sue her. We would use it to end her. Caroline called Richard's lead attorney. Her voice, she later told me, was a perfect blend of bored and dangerous. She informed him that new, independently verified evidence had come to light that fundamentally altered the parameters of the case. She requested one final settlement meeting to present our concluding terms. And one more thing, she had added, as if it were an afterthought. Your client's associate, Ms. Isabella de la Cruz. She must be present at the meeting. It directly concerns her. They had blustered, they had objected, they had claimed it was an irregular and unprofessional demand, but in the end, they had agreed. Isabella, arrogant and overconfident, would not be able to resist the opportunity to witness my final humiliating surrender. She would come. The day of the final meeting, I did not dress for battle. I dressed for a funeral. I wore a simple, elegant black dress, my grandmother's pearls, and a look of serene, unshakable calm. As I sat beside Caroline in that familiar, cold conference room, I was not nervous. I was not angry. I was simply ready. The long, agonizing war was about to be over. The door to the conference room opened. Richard shuffled in first, a ghost of the confident man he had once been. He looked older, smaller, a man completely and utterly defeated. He did not look at me. He took a seat at the far end of the table, as far away from me as possible, and then Isabella swept into the room. She was a vision in a blood-red power suit, a look of smug, triumphant victory on her face. She believed my demand for her presence was a sign of weakness, a final, desperate plea from a broken woman. She thought she had won. She nodded condescendingly at me, a queen acknowledging a vanquished subject, and took a seat beside Richard, placing her hand possessively on his. I looked at her confident smirk, at the predatory light in her eyes, and for the first time I felt a genuine, profound pity for her. She had no idea what was coming. She had walked into the room believing she was attending my surrender. She had no idea she was actually attending her own execution. The meeting began with a final, arrogant performance. Richard's lead attorney, a man whose tailored suit probably cost more than my first car, slid a slim folder across the table. He outlined their final, generous offer. It was a pittance, a fraction of what I was legally entitled to, an offer designed to let me leave the marriage with just enough to live quietly, while leaving Richard's fortune and reputation completely intact. It was an offer made by men who still believed they held all the power. Isabella sat beside Richard, a picture of supportive concern, her hand resting on his arm. She watched me, her eyes glittering with the triumphant, pitying light. She was savoring my defeat. Caroline and I listened patiently, without interruption. When the lawyer was finished, Caroline gave a small, almost imperceptible sigh, as if she were bored. "Thank you for that, Robert," she said, her voice calm and cool. "We respectfully decline your offer." She pushed their folder back across the table. "And now, we will present ours. It is not an offer. It is a list of our non-negotiable terms for a swift and silent resolution to this matter." She placed a single sheet of paper in front of Richard's lawyer. "The financial terms are straightforward," she said. "A full and immediate liquidation of 50% of all shared assets, including stock portfolios and real estate holdings, to be transferred to my client within 30 days. Furthermore, a punitive alimony payment for the next 10 years to account for the deliberate and malicious emotional distress and reputational damage caused by your client's actions." Richard's lawyer scoffed. "On what grounds?" "Your claims are baseless. You have no leverage for such an outrageous demand." Caroline's gaze shifted from the lawyer and settled for the first time on Isabella. "Oh, I think we do," she said, her voice dropping to a silken, dangerous tone. "Which brings us to our second term. This one is for you, Miss de la Cruz." Isabella's smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "I'm not a party to this divorce," she said, her voice sharp. "You are now," Caroline said. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick, bound document. She slid it across the table and it came to a stop directly in front of Isabella. "I believe you know the architect, Mr. Julian Croft. He sends his regards. This is his sworn and notarized affidavit detailing the entire timeline and financial arrangement of your affair and subsequent divorce from your previous husband. It's a fascinating read. A clear and repeatable pattern of behavior. I watched Isabella's face as she read the first page. The color drained from her cheeks. The confident, predatory light in her eyes was extinguished, replaced by the raw, primal terror of a cornered animal. She looked up, her eyes wide with disbelief and panic, first at me, then at Caroline. She saw no mercy in our faces. "We are not interested in a public scandal," Caroline continued, her voice like ice. "A trial for conspiracy and fraud would be so unpleasant, especially for the newlyweds, David and Chloe. Instead, this document, this insurance policy will remain in a very safe place. As long as our terms are met in full and without protest, it will never see the light of day." She leaned forward slightly. "But if you or Mr. Smith contest a single dollar, if you attempt to drag this out, or if you ever, for the rest of your life, contact my client or her family in any way, a copy of this affidavit will be sent to the district attorney's offices in both Los Angeles and Atlanta, the IRS, and every major news outlet in this country. Do I make myself perfectly clear? Checkmate." The room was utterly silent. Isabella was trapped. Richard was trapped. Their web of lies had become a cage, and I held the only key. To fight was to face absolute social and financial ruin and quite possibly a criminal investigation. Their only option was complete and total surrender. Isabella was the first to break. Without a word, she stood up, her face a mask of pure reptilian hatred, and she swept out of the room. Her war was over. She had lost. Richard just sat there, a broken, empty vessel. He looked at me, and for the first time there was no arrogance, no condescension. There was only the dawning, horrified understanding of a man who had bet his entire life on the wrong woman and had just lost everything. His lawyer, pale and visibly shaken, cleared his throat. We accept your terms," he stammered. "We will have the papers drawn up immediately." Caroline and I stood and walked out of the room, leaving them to sift through the wreckage. As we rode the elevator down, a profound and unfamiliar lightness filled my chest. The weight I had been carrying for 30 years, the weight of a loveless marriage, of constant disrespect, of this final, brutal betrayal had finally been lifted. The war was over. I had won. Out on the busy street, the city air felt fresh and clean. "So, what's next, Eleanor?" Caroline asked, a genuine, triumphant smile on her face. "A well-deserved trip around the world? A villa in Tuscany?" I stopped and looked at the people rushing past, at the ordinary, beautiful chaos of a normal afternoon. I was one of them now. A free woman with a blank page and a story of her own to write. I thought of my new quiet house. I thought of the walled garden, its soil still waiting to be turned. "No," I said to Caroline, a real, genuine smile finally reaching my eyes. "I think I'll just go home." I walked through the front door of my new townhouse, the quiet click of the lock behind me sounding like the most beautiful music I had ever heard. The war was over. The treaties were signed. And I was, for the first time in my adult life, a citizen of a nation of one. I was home. The house was still mostly empty, filled with boxes and the echo of possibility. For 30 years, my life had been defined by Richard, by David, by the endless social and domestic obligations of being a Smith. My days were a schedule to be managed, my time a resource to be allocated to others. Now, in the profound, unnerving, and utterly glorious silence of my own home, I was faced with a question I hadn't considered in decades. What did I want to do? The days that followed were not a whirlwind of celebration. They were quiet, deliberate, and deeply healing. The work of building a new life, I discovered, was done in small, simple acts. It was the act of unpacking my father's jazz records and placing them on a shelf, not hiding them in a study. It was the act of buying a bright, cheerful yellow teapot simply because I love the color. It was the act of sitting by my large bay window in the morning with no schedule to keep and reading a history book for 3 straight hours simply because I wanted to. My most important work took place in the small walled garden behind the house. It was a neglected, overgrown space, a perfect metaphor for my own life. I spent hours out there, my hands deep in the rich, dark soil. I tore out the thorny, choking weeds of the past. I turned the soil, aerating it, preparing it for something new. I planted rose bushes, lavender, and climbing jasmine. The physical labor was a balm to my soul. With every weed I pulled, I felt like I was pulling out a piece of the bitterness and resentment. With every new flower I planted, I was planting a seed of hope for my own future. I also rediscovered a part of myself I had packed away with my college art supplies 35 years ago. I bought a simple easel, a set of canvases, and some acrylic paints. I set up a small studio for myself in a spare, sunlit room. My first attempts were clumsy, my hands unsure. But the simple act of mixing colors, of trying to capture the light on a petal or the complex emotion in a memory, was a form of therapy more powerful than any I had ever known. I was no longer just the subject of a story. I was learning to become the creator. The final piece of the old world that needed to be put to rest was my relationship with my son. David called me a week after the settlement. He sounded hesitant, lost. "Mom," he said, "Dad's lawyers told us it's over. Are you okay?" "I am, my love," I said, and I was surprised by how true the words felt. "I'm more than okay." He came to the new house that weekend. He walked through the rooms looking at the books, at my fledgling art studio, at the garden taking shape. I could see him trying to understand the new world his mother now inhabited. We sat in the kitchen, and I decided that he deserved the whole unvarnished truth. I was no longer protecting his innocence. I was honoring his adulthood. I told him everything. About Isabella's history, about the architect, about the cold, calculated pattern of her predation. I showed him a copy of the affidavit. I explained that his father had not been a monster, but a weak, vain man who had been expertly played by a master manipulator. He read the affidavit in silence, his face growing pale. When he finished, he looked up at me, his eyes full of a new, horrified understanding. The last of his confusion was gone, replaced by a profound and sorrowful clarity. "My God, Mom," he whispered, "all this time I had no idea. The things I said to you, asking you to just forgive and forget, I am so sorry." "You have nothing to be sorry for," I told him, my heart aching with love for him. "You were caught in a storm you didn't create." We all were. That conversation was the final necessary act of healing. It rebuilt the bridge between us, not on the broken foundation of the past, but on a new ground of mutual respect and a shared, painful truth. A few days later, I was in my garden, my hands covered in soil, the late afternoon sun warm on my back. My phone rang. It was my sister, Martha. "Ellie," she said, her voice bright and cheerful. "The museum just opened that new exhibit on Impressionism we talked about. Do you want to go on Saturday? We could get lunch." It was such a simple, normal question. An invitation to joy, with no hidden agenda, no obligation. I looked at the rich earth on my hands, at the tiny green buds beginning to form on the rose bushes I had planted. For the first time in my adult life, my time was completely my own, my future a garden of my own design. "I would love that, Martha," I said, a genuine, unforced smile spreading across my face. "I would love that very much." I wasn't just planting a garden. I was finally, after all these years, planting my own roots. 2 years have passed since the day I walked out of that conference room, a free woman. The seasons have turned, the legal battles have faded into a distant bureaucratic memory, and the life I have built for myself, piece by painful, joyful piece, has begun to blossom. My townhouse, once a quiet and empty refuge, is now a home. It is filled with the scent of baking bread, the sound of jazz music from my father's old records, and the comfortable, happy clutter of a life being truly lived. The walls are no longer bare, they are covered with my paintings. The small sunlit room that I had designated as my studio has become the vibrant, beating heart of my new world. The painting that had started as a tentative, therapeutic hobby has become my passion and my voice. After the divorce, I enrolled in a local art class, a humble act of reclaiming a part of myself I had given up for my marriage, and I discovered, to my profound surprise, that I had something to say. My canvases were not filled with the anger and bitterness of my past. They were filled with color, with light, with the resilience of the flowers in my garden, with the complex, beautiful faces of the women I saw every day. Last spring, a small, respected gallery downtown offered me my first solo show. I was terrified, but I said yes. The night of the opening, the gallery was filled with friends, old and new. My sister Martha was there, her face beaming with pride. My son David and his wife Chloe stood by my side. People didn't just look at my paintings, they saw the stories within them. That night, I sold 5 canvases. It was never about the money. It was about the validation. I was no longer Eleanor Smith, the wronged ex-wife of a prominent architect. I was Eleanor Spencer, an artist, an identity I had forged for myself with my own 2 hands. My relationship with David and Chloe has become the greatest, most unexpected gift of my new life. The truth, as painful as it was to reveal, had ultimately been a cleansing fire. It had burned away the lies and allowed a new, honest, and profoundly deep bond to form between the 3 of us. Chloe, free from the toxic influence of her mother, has become the daughter I never had. Our shared trauma, our mutual survival of Isabella's manipulation, has created a connection that is unbreakable. They came over for lunch today. We sat in my garden, the one I had planted in the ruins of my old life, which was now a riot of color and life. David and Chloe were glowing with a happiness that was deep and real. "We have some news, Mom," David said, his hand covering Chloe's on the small garden table. Chloe looked at me, her eyes shining. "You're going to be a grandmother, Eleanor." The words, so simple, so beautiful, struck me with the force of a physical blow. A grandmother, a new life, a new generation, a new branch on our family tree, one that would grow in the clean, honest soil of the truth. Tears of a joy so pure I could barely contain it streamed down my face. We talked for hours about names, about nurseries, about the future. David mentioned briefly and with a complete lack of interest that he had heard through a former colleague that his father, Richard, had sold the large, cold mansion. He had downsized, moved to a condo downtown, and was living a quiet, solitary life. His career had stalled after the quiet scandal of our divorce. He had become a diminished man. Isabella, we had heard, had disappeared from the social scene entirely. The threat of the affidavit, a silent, powerful deterrent, had been enough. She had moved to Europe, no doubt in search of a new stage for her cruel performances. I listened to this news and I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no pity. They were ghosts. Characters from a long finished novel that no longer held any interest for me. My story was here, in this garden, with this new life on the way. Later, as David and Chloe were about to leave, Chloe took my hand and placed it on her belly, and then I felt it. A tiny, distinct, and miraculous flutter. The first kick of my grandchild. I looked from Chloe's radiant face to my son's proud and happy one. I thought of the woman I had been just 2 short years ago, a woman trapped in a silent, loveless prison, a woman who thought her life was over. I had lost a husband, it was true, but I had gained a true daughter. I had lost a house, but I had built a home. And I had lost the broken, fraudulent family I thought I had, only to find myself at the heart of a new one, a better one, built on a foundation of honesty and love. As I felt the tiny flutter of my grandchild's life beneath my palm, I understood the true nature of a legacy. It wasn't about the houses you lived in, the money you accumulated, or the marriages you endured. It was about the love you chose to nurture and the gardens you were brave enough to plant in the ruins of the old world. The 2 years that followed my liberation were not a victory lap. They were a quiet, steady, and joyful process of reconstruction. My new life was built not on grand gestures, but on the accumulation of small, authentic moments. The centerpiece of this new world was Sunday dinner. Every week, without fail, David and Chloe would come to my townhouse. The cold, formal dining rooms of my past were replaced by my warm, bustling kitchen, the air filled with the scent of roasting chicken and the sound of real, unforced laughter. We would talk for hours about their lives, about my art, about the future. Chloe, now free from the suffocating weight of her mother's influence, had blossomed. She and I had forged a bond that was stronger than blood, a deep and trusting friendship born from the ashes of our shared trauma. She was the daughter I had always dreamed of, and in our quiet talks I could see she felt she had finally found the mother she had always needed. My art became my work and my therapy. The small local gallery that had hosted my first show had become my champion. My paintings, which told the stories of resilience, of light found in darkness, of the quiet strength of women, had found an audience. I was no longer a hobbyist. I was an artist with a waiting list. The identity was no longer new and fragile. It was who I was. One crisp autumn afternoon on my way to the art supply store, I saw him, Richard. He was sitting alone at a small table outside a cafe in his new downtown neighborhood. I was across the street, and he never saw me. The powerful, charming architect was gone, replaced by a man who looked his age and more. He was stooped, his shoulders slumped, and he stared into his coffee cup with a profound and empty loneliness. The woman who had been the catalyst for our destruction, Isabella, was long gone, having disappeared to Europe to lick her wounds and no doubt to scout for new prey. Richard was alone. I stood there for a moment, an invisible observer, and I waited to feel something, a spark of the old anger, a flicker of satisfaction, a twinge of pity, but I felt nothing. He was a stranger, a figure from a story that no longer concerned me. I turned and walked away, and I did not look back. The focus of our family, the joyful center of our universe, was the impending arrival of my first grandchild, my granddaughter. David and Chloe asked me to help with the nursery in their small, charming home. The project became my greatest masterpiece. I spent weeks designing and painting a mural on the main wall. It was a sprawling, vibrant tree, its roots deep in a rich, dark earth, its branches reaching up and bursting with a constellation of colorful, blossoming flowers. It was a tree of life, a symbol of our new, resilient, and growing family. One afternoon, as I was adding the final delicate details to a magnolia blossom, Chloe came and stood beside me, her hand resting on her beautiful round belly. "It's the most beautiful room I've ever seen, Eleanor," she said, her voice soft with emotion. She looked at the mural, then at me. My own mother. Her idea of decorating was to hire the most expensive person she could find and then complain about the result. She paused, her eyes welling with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being the mother I always wished I had." I put down my paintbrush and hugged her, my own heart overflowing. The family I had lost had been an illusion. The family I had now, the one forged in truth and mutual respect, was real. That evening, back in my own studio, I worked on the final pieces for my new gallery show. The theme of the collection was Portraits of a Life. It was my story, told in color and canvas. There were paintings of my garden, of the quiet joy of my new home. There was a portrait of my son, his face full of a new, mature understanding. And then there were the two final opposing canvases. The first was a portrait I had forced myself to paint, a necessary act of exorcism. It was Isabella. I had worked from the one photograph I had of her from the wedding rehearsal. I had painted her as I now saw her, beautiful, charismatic, but with a cold, hollow emptiness in her eyes. It was a portrait of a ghost, a story that was over. I turned from her finished portrait to the one that stood on the main easel, the one I was still working on. It was much larger, and it was filled with a soft, radiant light. It was a portrait of Chloe, standing in my garden, her hands resting on her pregnant belly, her face a perfect picture of hope and new beginnings. I looked from the shadow of my past to the light of my future. One was a finished, dead thing. The other was a vibrant, living creation, full of promise. And I knew, with a certainty that filled my entire being, that the shadows no longer had any power over me. My life was about the light now. The night of my gallery opening was a moment suspended in time. The gallery was packed, a warm, buzzing hive of energy and conversation. Light spilled out from the large windows onto the street, a beacon of creativity and life. I stood in the center of the room, not as a hostess performing a duty, but as an artist sharing her soul. My story was on the walls, told in strokes of brilliant color and deep emotive shadows. It was the story of a woman's life, a story of loss, of resilience, and of the quiet, stubborn beauty that can grow in the ruins. My new friends were all there, my sister Martha, my fierce lawyer Caroline, my fellow artists from the class I had joined 2 years ago. They clinked glasses of champagne, their faces shining with a genuine pride and affection that was more valuable to me than any sale. And then there were my children. David and a heavily pregnant Chloe had been the first to arrive, their love and support a solid, warm presence at my side. I watched them as they walked through the gallery, their hands linked, and I saw the future. As I was speaking to a critic from the city paper, my phone buzzed with an urgent staccato rhythm. It was David. "Mom," he said, his voice a tight wire of panic and exhilaration. "It's time." Chloe's water just broke. We're on our way to the hospital now. I left in the middle of my own triumph, rushing out of the gallery full of my past to race toward the birth of my future. I arrived at the hospital in a breathless flurry, my heart pounding with an anticipation that eclipsed every other emotion I had ever known. The hours that followed were a long, tense, and beautiful vigil. I sat in the waiting room with David, holding his hand, sharing his fears and his hopes, no longer just his mother, but his partner in this profound and sacred moment. And then, just as the first pale light of dawn began to streak the sky, a nurse came out, her face wreathed in a tired, happy smile. "She's here," the nurse said. "A beautiful, healthy baby girl." When I was finally allowed into the room, I saw them. My son, David, his face a mess of joyful, exhausted tears, and Chloe looking like a weary, radiant Madonna holding a small blanket-wrapped bundle. "There's someone who wants to meet you, Grandma," Chloe whispered, her voice full of a deep, resonant love. She placed the baby in my arms. I looked down at the tiny, perfect, sleeping face, at the small, delicate hands, and the world, with all its pain and all its betrayals, simply fell away. This was the reason for it all. This was the prize at the end of the long, brutal war. This was the promise of a new and better world. "What's her name?" I asked, my voice choked with tears. David looked at Chloe, and she smiled at me. Her name is Eleanor, my son said. We're going to call her Ellie. The gift of my own name, a name passed down to this new, innocent, and beautiful life, was the greatest act of love I had ever received. It was a final, perfect healing of all the wounds of the past. A week later, I am in the nursery, the room with the tree of life I had painted on the wall. I am sitting in the rocking chair, my granddaughter, little Ellie, asleep on my chest. Her small, warm weight is a comforting, profound anchor. The house is quiet. My new life is quiet, and it is a quiet I have earned. I think of the two portraits that now hang in my gallery. The one of Isabella, a beautiful, tragic study of a woman consumed by shadows, has already been sold, sent away to a collector in another city. The portrait of Chloe, pregnant and full of light, now hangs in a place of honor in her and David's home. The story of the past is over, archived, and put away. The story of the future is where I now live. I look at the mural on the wall, at the deep roots and the blossoming branches. I think of the woman I was, the quiet, accommodating wife who lived in a gilded cage. I think of the warrior I became, the woman who fought a silent, brutal war for her own soul. And I think of the woman I am now, a grandmother, an artist, a matriarch of a small, strong, and honest family. As I look down at the tiny, perfect face of my granddaughter, Eleanor, I finally understand. For most of my life, I was defined by my relationships to others, Richard's wife, David's mother, but now I am simply and completely myself, and I know exactly who that is. She is the root of the tree, the one who weathered the storm so that a new and beautiful blossom could finally, safely reach for the sun